Okay, good afternoon, everybody. I think since Adel is here now, we are everybody.
Ready to go.
But it's great to see so many people here. And we are lucky to have a presentation today by Chantal, and I have practiced to pronounce her name, Levesque-Bristol from Purdue University, who is here on the occasion of Lucas's defense tomorrow. But as she flew all the way from America, we thought she shouldn't only be a tourist, but she had to give us something extra.
Sounds good.
So just before she starts, I will just notify you that this talk will be streamed. And so if you miss something, you can go to YouTube and watch it again afterwards. Okay.
Bonus.
Please.
Thank you so much. I'm so grateful to be here. It's my first time in Norway. Actually, first time in Europe. Should have happened before, but I'm so happy to be here and having the opportunity to talk to you today about excellence in teaching and learning from the self-determination theory perspective. And this is a topic that's very close to my heart. I'm very passionate about it, and I want to take this opportunity to kind of give you a little bit of background on how I came to faculty development and being the director of the Center for Instructional Excellence. So my research is in motivation, social psychology. I had worked and studied with Ed Deci and Rich Ryan, and I was in a tenure track position at Missouri State University, not even thinking about faculty development. I'm doing research on motivation in education, applying it to my classroom, and I meet the director of the center at the time, Roger Sell, and he says, "You've worked with Ed Deci and Rich Ryan." And I said, "Yeah." He says, "You do scholarship of teaching and learning." I'm like, "I do what?" And that's kind of how it started. It happened by accident, but it was a great accident, and I started working with faculty, talking about motivation in education, and really battling with this idea of what is excellence in teaching and learning? How do we foster it? How do I effectively work with faculty? So I was really coming in from the context of doing research in motivation. So that was my understanding, and that's how I came to faculty development. So I read a lot of books. I read this one that really captured my attention, in addition to things about Bill McKeechee, Teaching Tips, The Courage to Teach by Parker Palmer. But when I got to Ken Bain, and he talked about these conditions that foster deep learning in students, he really resonated with what I understood of motivation. Although he was not talking about self-determination theory, his concepts were very close to what I understood to be motivation. So he was talking about things like ownership and choice, and you'll see how that connects later when I talk more about the theory. Engagement. So these best teachers, what they were doing were engaging the students, guiding them through inquiry, interest and curiosity. They were fostering that in their students, reflection, and really drawing their prior experience. Collaboration, feedback, giving them feedback. Developmental goals, focusing on these types of goals that the students were interested in, and respect, care, and trust. So that really resonated with me. And I was thinking about, at the same time that I was thinking about excellence in teaching and learning, there were books like these, right? So as I was entering my faculty development career, higher education was sort of under attack. People were talking about students being academically adrift, our colleges being underperforming, and really students were not learning to the extent that we thought they should be learning, and whose responsibility was it to really think about student success? Was it the student's responsibility? Was it the teacher's responsibility? And there were debates, right, on either side. Who was responsible for student success? And then there was a book about student success in college. So George Koo had really been thinking about that for a long time and interviewing schools that he called deep schools that were really doing well at fostering student success and understanding the conditions that really helped them foster student success. And he talked about two factors that really predicted the extent to which students would be able to succeed. One was academic preparation, and the other one was motivation. And I thought, okay, I understand motivation. Again, coming from this self-determination theory perspective, although George Koo was really not talking about that particular theoretical framework, he was focusing on motivation as something really important. Because if you focus only on academic preparation, well, that's great. We could talk a lot about that. But when the students come to college, we can't change the level of academic preparation that they've had. They have what they have. However, we can really focus on motivation and try to foster the development of motivation to kind of close that gap. So that's the context. So in thinking about all of this, my colleagues and I at Missouri State University came up with this model that we call the integrative model for learning and motivation in higher education. And the idea here of these circles, which go deeper to the center, is that at the center you have student learning. You have those learning outcomes that we're trying to foster. But the learning is deep within the students. So imagine that you're coming from the outside going into the inside of that circle. I'm in a biology department, so I shouldn't push the cell analogy too much, but you could think about it as a sort of deeper into the cell structure. That's all I'll say about that. So the students are responsible for their learning, right? They're responsible for understanding the material, applying the material, learning, engaging, being motivated. We can't touch learning directly. We can't motivate students directly either, I would argue. So that is the responsibility of the students. But what we're responsible as faculty, teacher, is to work on the outside layer, to create these environments that are fostering autonomy, fostering what I'll talk about in terms of engaging environment, autonomy supportive environment. That's what we can act upon. That's what we can craft. And once we do that, then the motivation of the students that are placed in these environments will be activated, and then learning will then occur. So our role, our responsibility is to create these environments that are student-centered, motivational, engaging, meaningful, and sometimes enjoyable, right? It shouldn't always be boring to learn. It's hard. It's not always fun, but it should be meaningful. That's our role. So this is how I came to think about sort of this interaction between the faculty responsibility and then the student responsibility in that learning endeavor. So I want to talk a little bit more about self-determination theory, since this model, this integrative model, is really informed by self-determination theory. So this theory proposes the existence of three basic psychological needs: autonomy, competence, and relatedness. And when these needs are met, they're satisfied. That's when self-determined level of motivation increases, and then those positive outcomes follow. Autonomy, I want to say a few words about this here, and then I'll dig more into this in the next few slides. Autonomy does not mean free-for-all or doing whatever you want to do. That's very important. In the context of self-determination theory, it's about choice, ownership, engagement. Now you see the connection that I was making with Ken Bain. When I was reading about Ken Bain's teachers who were effective, to me I was hearing they are creating these environments that are autonomy supportive. They're fostering students' basic psychological needs. Competence, we focus a lot on that in education, mastery of skills. Relatedness, we often forget about. This connection between students, connection between students and the instructor, and also with the material. In research that we're conducting in the center, in our lab at the center, this is sort of the sequence that we're testing. So it's representing the model, the circular model, but in a more linear fashion. So these environments, these learning environments that are autonomy supportive will then meet the basic psychological needs of autonomy, competence, and relatedness. And we now have quite a bit of evidence showing that competence is the basic psychological need that's more proximally related to motivation and then the learning outcome. So it's very important to build competencies, to meet the competence. But in doing so, we have to create environments that are autonomy supportive. Because if that's not happening, the skills that we are imparting, that we're thinking we're imparting upon the students, are really not integrated, and they won't lead to lifelong learning. We actually have quite a bit of research that we're conducting right now showing this effect, replicating this effect. A lot of it is in preparation or in various iterations of publication process. But this is just to show that we have evidence to demonstrate that competence is the most proximally related. But I want to focus on autonomy supports. I'm going to go back just a second. I want to focus on how do we work with the outer circle in creating an environment that is autonomy supportive. What do we, should we keep in mind when we're working with creating these environments that are autonomy supportive? Thinking about the participant. Start with the students in mind, not the discipline. Take the student's perspective. What attracted you to your discipline? What's so awesome about what you teach? Think about how you were when you were a student. Get to know them. Where are they coming from? What are they interested in? Strategies. Get students' attention, curiosity. That is really an interesting trigger for motivation. Offer choices, encourage reflection. Trust the students in that learning process. Not giving free grades. Academic rigor is very important, but trust the students in that journey. Content. Consider your goals, learning outcomes. What is it that you really want the students to be able to know, do, and appreciate about the topic? There are 3 things that you would want them to retain. What would they be? And why? Present problems that are intriguing and authentic, things that they would want to solve. You may not have the answers. That's okay. Goals that are valued and that would be connecting with students' personal interests and fostering personal growth. Allow students to find path to their own answer. It's kind of a journey. Allow and accept negative affect. It's hard. Learning is hard, and it's okay. Being autonomy supportive means that sometimes you're going to have students that are going to not want to do what you ask them to do, not want to learn, and not want to engage in that process, and in working with that. And some other research that we're doing right now in terms of looking at course feature, right? So we're thinking a lot about, well, okay, you talk about autonomy support, but what about sort of tools and technique, like a recipe book? What is it that I can do that will work? And there's not really that one thing that will work. And there's a lot of work right now in technology and techniques that might solve or help with learning. And what we're finding is that it's really not about technology or even active learning per se. It's how you do it. It's really not what you do. It's how you do it. It's really about this autonomy supportive environment. You could be teaching with chalks, and that's a tool and technique. And if you use it well in an environment that is autonomy supportive, it will foster learning. You could also use chalks poorly. You could use technology poorly as well, right? Sometimes it gets in the way as opposed to fostering the learning. So what we found in our current research is that the learning climate has the greatest positive influence on the basic psychological need satisfaction and then motivation and learning. It's not to say that problem-based learning doesn't work, right? It's just to say that problem-based learning works if it's done well. I would argue that it's because it's fostering this environment that meets basic psychological need, and that's what we're researching. Now, what if it's not fun, right? What if it's not meaningful? What if it's just a series of equations that they have to learn and you really can't make it fun? Provide a rationale. That's a very important way that you can increase student motivation. Tell them why. This is why we have to do this. I know it may not be fun, but this is the reason why. And importance of the tone. Sometimes it's not what you say, it's how you say it. So you could say something like, that sounds autonomy supportive on paper, but if you're saying it in a way that is belittling the student, it will be perceived as being controlling, and it will not produce the desired effect. So in looking at the sequence, we also are now doing research to look at the strengths of these links in different populations. And the link between satisfaction of autonomy and competence is very important for everybody, every student, and you can even think about yourself, right? Every person, think about how you learn. But it's even more important for women in the sciences than men in the sciences. So creating these environments that are autonomy supportive work for everybody, but even more so for women. So in continuing into this sort of journey to learning, we talked about the basic psychological need. Competence is the most proximally related, and then we get down to student motivation. Is there another way to look at it? Motivation will then predict learning gains, perceived learning gains, knowledge transfer, and actual course grade performance. These links are very important, very strong for everybody, but again, especially for women in the sciences compared to women in non-science field, and also for students coming in with lower academic preparation. So if we have entering students with lower SATs, these links are even more important. So creating an environment that fosters motivation is even more important. I want to talk a little bit about the continuum of motivation from self-determination theory perspective. So at one end, this is another contribution of self-determination theory, is the types of motivation. Not just the quantity of motivation, but the quality of the motivation. From the absence of motivation at amotivation, right at the bottom, to intrinsic motivation, which is doing it only because it's fun and enjoyable. And it's a misconception to think that we have to foster intrinsic motivation and that's the only way, right? It happens sometimes in education, but it's a sort of a fleeting, there's so much that you have to do, right? A lot of the students will be at this level, introjection and external regulation. Forms of extrinsic motivation where you'll hear the student say, I'm doing it because I have to, or I'd feel guilty not to. Those lead to negative outcomes. What we want to see and where magic happens is when the students can relate to their behavior in education as being identified forms of motivation. They find value and importance in what they're doing. Right? So think again about sort of this rationale. If I can understand why I'm doing something, I'm still doing it as a means to an end. It's still an external form of regulation. But at that point, I understand why and it's important. So I'm engaging it from a self-determined perspective. I'm buying into that process. Integration, it's part of who you are, and we see this more as the students develop through their studies. Right? But you don't have to foster joy and enjoyment. It doesn't have to be fun every day, although it helps, right, to hook them. But then hard work is necessary. But identification will get you a long way. So in summary, right, so these autonomy supportive environments are going to lead to greater self-determined motivation, greater engagement, cognitive flexibility, deep learning, transfer of learning, greater academic performance, greater retention, greater ability to reflect. Okay, how do we foster it, right? Again, there's no recipe book. But John Marshall Reeve and his colleagues have engaged for the past several years in trying to really answer that question. Can we teach faculty, teachers to be more autonomy supportive and foster these level of motivation in student and a learning outcome? So he's created a whole program of research looking at autonomy supportive intervention programs. And he's done that mostly in K through 12. And the answer to that question is yes, you can actually foster or teach self-determination principle and become more autonomy supportive. And the teacher who have been exposed to the intervention become more autonomy supportive. They actually focus more on intrinsic goals, which foster personal growth and development. Again, going back to Ken Bain, he was talking about that as well. and foster greater efficacy in teaching. Think that you can actually, the teachers can actually do or think they can do a better job. At Purdue, for the past, since fall 2011, we've been engaged in a program called IMPACT. It stands for Instruction Matters, Purdue Academic Course Transformation. And what IMPACT does is to foster student-centered learning, autonomy, supportive environment in college teachers. So what we're trying to do since fall 2011 is follow self-determination theory and, in a way, develop these autonomy supportive intervention program for college faculty. And we have been able to be successful. So this 80.8% is the percentage of students who, when we ask them about the learning environment that they're experiencing when they're part of an impact class, 80% of the students are reporting that this environment is actually engaging, student-centered, autonomy supportive. It's a large collaboration. So the Center for Instructional Excellence, which I'm the director of, is part of this program, but we cannot do this on our own. It's a university-wide commitment. We work with information technology at Purdue. We work with the librarians. Again, technology is important. It's often a way to foster deeper engagement. Most of the transformation will use some kind of technology. I mean, they all use technology because my voice is a technology. I'm using tools, right? But technology, as we understand, sort of these kinds of things. But it's in how we use them. This is really what's important. When faculty work on their redesign, it's to really help them understand what is it that you want your students to really learn, do, and appreciate? And then what are you going to do? What strategy are you going to use? What content to get there in an autonomy supportive way? And we really talk to them about fostering the basic psychological needs of autonomy, competence, and relatedness. So it's really based in self-determination theory. It's a faculty development program which lasts the entire semester, and they form learning communities. So they work in groups with other faculty members and their support team members working on the redesign of their courses. We're supported by the provost and the president. This program has a pretty significant reach. And that's why we're not doing it on our own as the Center for Instructional Excellence. But you're reading this right. This is 59,392 distinct students that have been touched by impact since we started in fall 2011. So all of these students have taken at least one impact course, and some of them are taking multiple in the same semester. So we have the data, and we're going to start looking at that dosage effect. Is it better to take 2 or 3? Or is it better to only take 1? What if you take 1 every semester that you're at Purdue? We've worked with faculty to redesign 468 courses. We work with 289 faculty. And this actually works across discipline. So it's not limited to STEM or non-STEM or liberal arts, across discipline. In order of importance, Purdue is a STEM engineering school, so technology is at the top. They have technology. Purdue Polytechnic has actually made an institutional commitment to be transformative, to transform all of their courses, to transform their program. Liberal arts, engineering, science, health and human science, agriculture, and management. What do the faculty say about this program? So we measure, we assess the faculty, the students, every semester. It's giving them the opportunity to really reflect on their teaching, to interact with colleagues and talk about teaching, which is not often possible in higher education. Create clear learning objectives, help them think about how to provide individualized feedback to students, And then again, technology, identify appropriate technology for their redesign, but also how to use it appropriately, which is very important. And they believe that the program really adds value to their teaching. For us, that's really critical at Purdue because we are a research-intensive institution, and to be able to do something like this for teaching is pretty much unheard of. And I want to say a little bit more about the learning objectives. So every faculty create learning objectives for their course, learning outcome, and what we do is that we actually categorize them in terms of the levels of Bloom's taxonomy that these objectives meet. And the faculty will submit their outcomes at the beginning of the program and then at the end of the program. And we find actually a change from at the beginning of the program, the learning outcomes tend to be at the lower level of the Bloom's taxonomy. And with the professional development, with the discussion with their faculty, they revise their outcome to actually measure more at the higher level of the taxonomy. The faculty also report on their students. So the students not only report the environment to be more autonomy supportive, but the faculty also note that their students are more engaged in the course. They are more likely to be active and to participate in class, to engage in critical thinking skills and problem solving. They develop information literacy skill and also good study habits. There's also an impact on course grade. So when we look at the autonomy supportiveness of the learning environment and the final course grade, we see a positive correlation, small effect size, but it's there overall. Now, where the effect is really striking is when we get into those high failure, large enrollment classes, where the DFW rate, which means letter grades of D, F, and withdrawal from the course is high. Through participation in the impact program, there's a reduction in almost 5% in the failure rate, which translates into about 400 students that do not have to repeat that course and can stay on track toward graduation. Impact is also the intervention for our STEAM grant-funded project from the Department of Education. STEAM stands for Success Through Transformative Education and Active Mentoring. And specifically there, when we look at, let's say, a calculus sequence, something that's very hard for students to get through, we actually, and this is a control study, there's about a 6.8%, 6.6% for 6.8 for women, 6.6 for men, increase in pass rate. So there's actually some significant impact. And I'm going to finish with this. So at Purdue, and I think this is sort of putting it all together, I talked about the support that we have from the provost and the president's office. Purdue has really made an institutional commitment. Impact is a Purdue move. And in the fall 2017, a brand new building opened up. It's called the Wilmette Active Learning Center. And it's an active learning building, and it's a merge, it's a library building, but it's a merge of active learning space with the libraries. And about a third of the courses that are taught there are impact courses. Our office is also in the building. And what we see is that faculty come to us for help. Even if they have not been through impact, we work with them, and we work with them in the same way. So what I would like to do is just show you, because I can't just tell you about how cool this building is without, so I'm going to spend another 3 minutes on this, if that's okay. I think we're good on time, to show you.
Hi, I'm Katie Market, and welcome to another edition of Boiler Bites, the show that features fascinating stories from Purdue University. Today I'm standing on the 3rd floor of the newest building on Purdue's West Lafayette campus. At 164,000 square feet and a cost of $79 million, the Thomas S. and Harvey D. Wilmette Active Learning Center is much more than just another campus building. When its doors finally swung open in August of 2017, not only did it mark the completion of a project that was a decade in the making, but it also instantly transformed the campus in ways that nobody could envision.
We are heralding the arrival of an all-new era for this campus. It's like someone turned a switch, and the Wilmeth Active Learning Center is now the new hub of the campus. The attributes that the Wilmeth Active Learning Center brings to Purdue is totally unique. The marrying of library and classroom spaces has never been tried before.
So it used to be that you went to your classroom, and then you went to the library, and then you went home. It sort of blurs those lines. So you study in the space, but you can actually then, it is your classroom. Your classroom is in it, but then, maybe you hang out with your fellow students or your professor after class, and, the learning continues.
The vision was to try to integrate learning in a lot of different environments. So learning within the classroom and learning beyond the classroom.
It is unique in that it's a number of classrooms in one location, and again unique because it's a consolidated engineering and science library.
There were 6 libraries that were consolidated in this space. Most of our information resources available digitally has allowed us to free up and control less of the space, and therefore we could integrate the library and classroom building. There are 27 classrooms, ranging in size from as small as 50 to as large as 300. Now, the important part to remember this is that each one of these rooms is designed to be active learning.
The active learning classrooms are designed for students to be able to move around in the classroom.
Students are all engaged in some sort of action, right? They're not sort of sitting passively listening to a lecture.
5 minutes, the instructor's talking, giving directions or introducing a concept, and they can turn around, form a small group, talk about it, discuss.
This gives them an opportunity to engage with their fellow students and learn from their fellow students as well.
Students can learn more when they're sort of more engaged in the learning process. I think active learning actually prepares students better for the work and the kinds of things that they are going to want to be doing after they leave the university. This building with the 27 classrooms has really enabled a lot more people to do this kind of work.
Faculty have said that it has enabled them to teach in ways they've been wanting to for a long time. Students have affirmed how much they appreciate and value the active, the collaborative, the project-based learning that this space is so well suited to.
So the building is located on the site of the old power plant.
It was built.
Okay. So that's what I wanted to show you, and in a way I brought my colleagues here without having to fly them. Clarence Maybe, the librarian, is part of our group working on impact. So that's kind of what I wanted to talk about today. I've spoke for about 30 minutes, so I know that in terms of engagement, it's time to give you time to interact. So I'll stop right here and let you ask questions. Thank you.